BMX. So I thought that to start out, it would be good to just go into the thing that everybody talks about right now and everyone's seeing as prices are starting to rise, and that is just the general increase in the cost of BMX parts and bikes. So from your perspective, you see it from the very beginning all the way to the very end. So how can we make this understandable for people who don't see that?
So it's a tough one. So even like obviously everyone knows the pandemic caused all these shortages and price increases, but even from before that, you can look at certain BMX products. Anyone in the industry would agree: a frame, a fork, a pair of cranks, most handlebars. Realistically, when you're generally setting up price structures in the general world of wholesale retail business, you're looking at 50%, increase. If a bike shop buys something for $50, they want to sell it between 90 and 100.
Mm-hmm.
If you buy a pair of pedals for $5, you're going to want to retail them, as somebody at wholesale level, you're going to want to retail them for around 14 to 15. So, but what happened with frame, forks, and bars is those percentages were already so darn tiny. I mean, there's literally, I've seen frames in my history, even 5 years ago, where companies were making 28 to 30% on it. You got to realize when you're buying a frame for X point amount, you're paying a rider a percentage of that frame or a set dollar amount royalty on it, on each frame. By the time that's the end of the day, when you sell those frames or that one frame, you barely made enough money to keep the lights on for that hour of the day. So they're already, in BMX was, in my eyes, quite a bit of a problem. And I would, Mo or anybody would likely tell you that those certain high-end items that are more expensive, like the frame, there's really not a lot of profit built into them.
Mm-hmm.
So there already was essentially a problem moving into the pandemic. Then comes the pandemic where initially everyone, including myself, is sitting there as excited as we are that all the schoolyards are shut down and we can ride without dealing with the cops and whatnot. We're also sitting there as businesses thinking, well, shit, nobody can do anything. There's no events, everything's shutting down, no one knows, there's all this uncertainty. And BMX has always suffered from a lack of working capital. There's no company out there that can be like, I'm going to throw a contest. Here's $80,000 or $20,000. No one has that in BMX. Very few people are able to even get that. So with everyone fighting in general for working capital and questioning COVID, everyone started scaling back orders. They started canceling orders because they didn't know what was going to happen. They needed to make sure that whatever they bought, they were going to sell within a set amount of window. So now you see a decrease at the factory level. So the factories initially, they're already going through shutdowns in China, Taiwan, parts of the US, parts of Europe that do assembly, all over worldwide, we're going through a shutdown. These factories are seeing this, so they start scaling back materials that are coming in, employees, the time they're going to spend on your account, they might shift now to another account. So you're seeing this scale back that started with BMX. And then what happened all of a sudden was it was quite the opposite, right? Everyone was told you either stay inside or you go to your public park and stay away from everybody. So everybody went outside and bought everything. Mm-hmm. I started at Haro right when the pandemic started. At one point, my job was on hold for close to a month where they weren't sure if they were going to hire me or what was going to go on because of the pandemic. But then, so I started Haro. All of a sudden, it just goes apeshit. The world's buying bikes. Haro's warehouse on an average, I couldn't tell you an average number. Haro's warehouse, when it's maxed out, holds about 18,000 bikes. Keep in mind, that's not just BMX bikes, that's mountain bikes. They own a road brand, they own a beach cruiser lifestyle brand, they do electric bikes, the whole 9 yards. But when I started out at Haro, we're probably 2 to 3 months into the pandemic. I walk in there and that warehouse is empty.
Wow.
So if Haro's warehouse is empty, you got to realize Haro's not Trek. We're not specialized. We're not the, in the grand scheme of bicycle companies, in a BMXer's eyes, people might think Haro's big, right?
Yeah.
GT's big. But in the grand scheme of it, GT BMX or Haro BMX, even though they're bigger in BMX, they're actually a really small brand to most vendors. So then what happened was essentially already there's a material shortage going on because you've got Trek, Specialized, all the huge tire companies buying up rubber, raw materials. They're starting to demand factories that are able to produce bikes to open up capacity, based on their cash flow. So then you've got all these companies in BMX that are, in the grand scheme of the bike industry, they're the lower 50% and down, I would say, in BMX, arguably maybe 40% and down if we need to be honest with ourselves. So you've got this small 40% yelling and screaming, hey, we need bikes too, we need bikes too, we need bikes too. That's not the way business works, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And at that point, BMX had already scaled back orders while Giant, Trek, Specialized, in some cases, the stupid fitness bikes that people rode at home, Peloton bikes. If you weren't able to buy a pivotal seat, or if you wonder why Haros and all other brands don't have pivotal seats, it's because Peloton puts such a huge demand in at the world's largest seat manufacturer that they created a 3-year delay for pivotal seats. Because to the owner of that seat manufacturer, as nice of a person as they are, they're doing business. If they can take an order now for 100,000 Peloton seats, they're going to do it now rather than waiting for 40,000 BMX seats.
Yep. And there's only one company that makes pivotal BMX seats.
Yes, exactly. And luckily that's all fixed now, or somewhat fixed for the time being. But anyway, so what you have is the capacity disappeared for BMX. We're all fighting for it. Even at Haro, we fought for it. Like, I literally, voices get raised in these meeting rooms where you're like, I bought X amount of bikes and you won't do this, trying to get capacity, trying to lock down material, trying to lock down product. Meanwhile, the whole industry is paying more for raw material. I think steel, as of last week, was up just in the last year, not 2 years, over 140%. So that's essentially, something that cost us $50, it's 150 plus now. That's for the very raw material. So you're starting at that point, a year into COVID, you're starting to see all these crazy price increases, and everybody in BMX, myself included, is going like, man, I don't know if the market can bear this. Like, I don't know, what do we even do? What do we do here? And then, so you're fighting for capacity, raw materials are going up, but as raw materials are going up, COVID's still waving in and out. So the factory, we'll use Malaysia, for instance. Haro doesn't use Malaysia, but Shimano makes disc brakes there. That doesn't affect BMX, but in general, it's a good example.
Yeah.
They shut down, I think, 4 different times within a year for 60 days at a time. Imagine what that did to all the people trying to make mountain bikes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of similar stuff happened in BMX, whether it was seats, pedals, handlebars, different vendors that are popular and got backed up and dealt with influxes of having to close their business because of COVID. So anyway, we've got this problem with capacity compiled with the problem of raw materials. So now it's already in the factory's best interest to raise prices because you need them. If they tell me, if I got an email one morning that said the cost of the Haro downtown is now going up 2%, in that case scenario during COVID, all I really could say is, okay, all right, that's nothing. What's 2%? I can't argue it. So then you go, the other scenario that happened, and happened real fast, and it affected everything that, we purchase as humans, is container prices went up. What used to be, I remember seeing container prices 5 years ago at 5,000. I remember seeing them 3-4 years ago at 8,000 to 10,000 tops. I remember seeing them 6 months ago. I definitely saw an invoice that somebody paid outside of Haro that was $26,000 for a container.
Jeez.
So do the math, the simple math on $26,000 divided by, say, 500 bikes. Right there, you're dealing with a massive increase, and there's no way to argue it. The Targets, the Sam Clubs, the Walmarts, they all import enough goods that some of them, Walmart owns container ships. They own containers. Other companies, the mass market bikes, so Hyper, brands like that, they're done through Walmart. So they're on Walmart's contract. So while Haro's paying $20,000 for a container, they're paying $9,000. Just $1,000 more than they were paying during non-pandemic. And on top of that, these containers, they sit, normally 4 weeks easy from Shanghai, China, from Taipei, Taiwan. You're talking 4 weeks out of the factory into Haro's building for sale. Now you're talking 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, I just had a container of samples sit literally an hour off the port here in Long Beach for 2.5, 3 weeks, just sitting there dead in the water that I needed.
Yeah.
So, you've got this compiled problem of the original price margin already being low, then the capacity going up, the material price going up, and then shipping containers. I mean, there was one time in this, almost to give out too much information, this isn't what I paid, but at one point I saw an increase on a couple bikes that Haro made where a factory was trying to increase a bike 27%.
One time.
One time.
Wow.
27%. Now, arguably, there's a bit of negotiation and, you fix these things and you work on them. But imagine if you're already paying 1.5 times on a container, then you get hit with that. It's a tough pill to swallow, and how do you do this? Somebody like me, I grew up, I want bikes to be obtainable. I want any kid to be able to get on a bike and have fun, no matter what. I want them to start out having fun on a bike. Hopefully they get into BMX and it works great. But so for me, I don't want to raise prices to the general public ever at all. But if they're raised to me to the point where there was some bikes where I saw orders on where we barely made any money, or by the time the cost of doing business was involved, I'm sure there was money lost. And I'm sure it was lost for a lot of companies in BMX, because you don't just ship the container of bikes.
Right.
You might not need them, but you don't just ship the container of bikes. So I guess in short, that really, COVID starts it, then you've got, the demand being dwindled back by BMX, then we find out we need it while it's not available, the capacity at factories isn't available, and then all of a sudden all the material rises. And on top of that, some material is extremely hard to get. For instance, any steel tubing that's chromoly seamless tubing, which all of us use for our chain stays and seat stays. If it's under 20 millimeters outside diameter, it's extremely hard to get the tubing right now in Taiwan. So a frame that used to have a 9-month lead time now is over a year lead time, because there's people just waiting in line to get that tubing. I went to go there's a premium stem that was set to be 50 millimeters wide rather than, at the actual, the bar bore. So that way it was, a little less slippage, whatever.
Yeah.
I had to go down to 49, a whopping 1 millimeter change, no big deal. But just because they couldn't get the block of aluminum in the size that you can see it. So it's either wait a year or decrease a millimeter. So, I feel bad for a lot of consumers, and even, I was even joking around. I went to a bike shop when COVID started and somebody tried charging me $20 for an Odyssey slick cable. And of course I just walked away because I'm like, wait, this is insanity.
Yeah.
And at the time it really was. So I do feel bad for people, but we all have to realize too, it's like, I tell people at Haro when they're like, oh, person X is getting a wheelie bike. That's crazy. It's like, well, person X just got a raise because they got a wheelie bike, and person X also rides a bike down to 7-Eleven like the rest of us do every day, so why not have fun, But what I try to tell everybody is in those scenarios, and you have to remember, is that all of this goes back to the riders. It all goes back to the riders, to the employees. Even at a company like Haro, and I know there's a lot more companies that are more core, but a company like Haro, everyone that actually touches BMX is from BMX and rides BMX. Our head designer, he might not ride BMX anymore, but he was an amazing photographer for years in the 90s and 2000s, and he still will get on his BMX bike, and he started out riding BMX bike. Our sales manager, James Ayers, used to be a single A pro for years, So it's like so you're really, when you're buying a product, as much as the increased cost, people need to realize too, it is going back to BMX.
Yeah.
People do